So it's time for my favorite video to film and also my favorite video to watch, and that is the best books of the year. I had so much fun coming up with this list. I was not the best at narrowing down which ones would make this list and which ones wouldn't. So there are going to be 16 books on here, which I acknowledge is a lot. But I did read over 50 books this year, which is more than I usually read. So I wanted to make sure I gave every book that I really enjoyed a spot here. Also, I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing this super festive sweater, and it's the same print of the guy's hat in Home Alone, which is part of the reason why I got it. And I was gonna film this video with my moose mug from Christmas vacation, just because I'm feeling the most festive today, even though it's after Christmas when I'm filming this, but it's in the dishwasher, so you guys are just gonna have to imagine that I'm holding that. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started with my favorite books of the year. As per usual, I'm going to be starting with my least favorite of the favorite and moving up to my favorite book of the year. So coming in at number 16, we have The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This is a book that totally took me by surprise, and it was part of this secret TBR challenge that I did during this year that I never really finished, so I never ended up talking to you guys about the books that I read for it. But needless to say, this is a book that takes place in a Paris opera house, and there's a ghost that is haunting the opera house. Some of my favorite parts of this book were the love triangle and the love interest. It's one of my favorite love interests ever. It's so complex and so morally gray, and I just think it's so interesting. And I also found parts of this book super gripping, and the plot just to be so addictive. And I really wasn't expecting it because it is an older book, and I did know that the movie had been more popular than the book, so I thought that I was going to end up not enjoying the book as much, but as soon as I got rolling with it, I just absolutely loved it, and I ended up giving it 4 stars, I believe, and I think it's going to be a tradition for me to read that every Halloween, and then watch Hocus Pocus as well. I think it'd be the perfect spooky night. Anyways, I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. It is definitely worth the hype. So coming in at number 15, we have the entire Diviner series, and I do acknowledge that it is a little bit cheating to put an entire series as a number on this list, but I kind of think of them as one experience, and overall it was a completely unforgettable one. The Diviner series takes place in New York City in the 1920s and follows this awesome group of friends, and there's this mysterious kind of sickness sweeping through New York City, and they're trying to get to the bottom of what is causing it and how to stop it from happening. I loved this book for its 1920s vibes. I loved it for its spooky kind of paranormal aspects, but also with those like historical fiction almost aspects as well. And it was just the most immersive journey from start to finish. It broke my heart. There were, romances and friendships that I just loved and savored reading about. This is actually my first series that I've read of Libba Bray, but I just really enjoyed it. So I'm looking out for whenever she comes out with a new series. If I had to say what my favorite one was, I liked the first book called The Diviners, and I liked Layer of Dreams. The King of Crows, the last book in the series, is a bit of a letdown for me. Just felt like it was a little disjointed, but overall I still enjoyed all of them individually and as a cohesive experience as well. Coming in at number 14, we have Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This was it seems, annual release, I guess, of Riley Sager. I am very impressed with how quickly he can just churn out mystery thriller books that are very high quality. But anyways, this is a book about a woman who goes back to her childhood home, which is probably not like the average childhood home because it is known for being haunted. And her dad actually wrote a book about how haunted this house was, and their family's become very famous because of it. And so she's going back to the house to flip the house, but really she is looking into how many of the ghost stories that he wrote about in the book are real and what is not, because she can't really remember what happened. This had so many spooky gothic vibes, definitely lots of haunted house vibes. So if that's your thing and you really like horror books related to that, I would definitely recommend this. It wasn't my favorite Riley Sager, but it was a solid new release of his and enough to keep me picking up his annual book. Coming in at number 13, we have His and Hers by Alice Feeney. This is another fantastic mystery thriller. It follows a BBC reporter who goes back to her sleepy hometown in the countryside to investigate a murder that happened there. Of course, one of my favorite tropes. I love like cold cases or people like going back to a place that they haven't been to for a while to investigate a murder, and as the story unravels, things are just not quite what they seem. It is super quick, super fast, super punchy. Alice Feeney has a way of doing that and just making every chapter kind of a plot twist and full of action. And I just haven't seen that many people talking about it, but it's definitely worth reading and I really enjoyed it. Coming in at number 12, we have a classic, which was actually a reread for me, but it's been so long since I've read it that I'm kind of counting it as a first time, and that is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I read this at the beginning of lockdown when I just like needed to not be in 2020. I just like needed to immerse myself in a different world, and this was perfect. It takes place in the countryside. I think it's Scotland, not 100% sure. But anyways, Watson and Holmes hear of this case where this dog is supposedly haunting a family there. And so Watson goes out to investigate, and he kind of writes a diary of him trying to track down like who this dog is and like what is really happening here. And it's just very mysterious and kind of like rainy countryside vibes, which I love to read about. And I really like this Sherlock Holmes particularly because it was told from the perspective of Watson mainly. So it was a lot more kind of accessible, like you could read it with Watson and kind of get what he was thinking. So I really, really enjoyed it. And at number 11, we have The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. So I buddy read this with my family over the summer, and I thought that it would be, you know, kind of a safe thing for me to do, to just read it as a person and interpret it for myself. But I thought it would be more of a challenge and something that would be more outside of my comfort zone if I read it with my family, because my family and I don't really discuss race very often, and it felt like it was something that we should discuss more. So I decided to read it with them, and it was a fantastic experience. We talked about it on Zoom calls, and I think because of that experience, I've realized the benefit of buddy reading books with people, specifically about topics that you haven't talked about with them before, to kind of discuss something new and to learn something new. And so overall, that was a really positive experience for me. And I'm hoping to do more buddy reads with my family as well as my friends about racial injustice, because I think it's a really great way to better educate ourselves, but also to have conversations with each other about racial injustice. Overall, too, this book was a really interesting read. It's about mass incarceration of Black males, and there were so many moments of this book that made me just stop and realize just how messed up things are. And if you're looking for a book to read that's pretty accessible but also has a lot of information in it, I think it's a great place to start. Coming in at number 10, we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This was, I think, all of our favorite books that we read for the Tea Leaves Book Club this year. And I'm going to talk more about the Tea Leaves Book Club, I think, in my 2020 wrap-up video, because it has just been such a life-changing and wonderful experience for me this year. But if I talk about it now, this video is going to be even longer than it already is. So The House in the Cerulean Sea is a, I think, adult book, but it kind of reads like a middle grade. And it's about this kind of like magical world where there are like magical creatures, but also humans. And you follow this main character, Linus, and he works as part of this government organization to basically make sure that magical creatures are being looked after well, I guess. And so as part of his assignment, he goes to this orphanage run by Arthur Parnassus, who's this awesome character that I really enjoyed reading about, as well as all of the kind of magical creatures and children that live there. On top of being what we all described as feeling like a warm hug, just being very comforting and fun to read, it did deal with a lot of important issues about diversity and kind of the way we address diversity in society, and not necessarily always in the best way. And I already am looking at more of TJ Klune's other books because I just thought it was so well written, and also really could be enjoyed by many different age groups, which I think is always a sign of a great book. Coming in at number 9, we have Educated by Tara Westover. I read this memoir at the beginning of this year, and it is about this woman who grows up in a very kind of isolated, deserted area. And her family believes in a lot of things that the rest of us don't believe in. They kind of, for example, she like never went to a doctor growing up because they didn't really believe in modern medicine, among many other things that she addresses in the book. And she, as she grows up, kind of decides to part with what her family has always done, and she decides to apply for college and go to college. And it's about her kind of transition to being involved, I guess, in modern education. It was just really interesting. It broached a lot of subjects that I haven't really thought about before, just because they're so ingrained in our everyday life that you don't really think about, like, what if not everyone kind of does things the way you do them? Like, she never really went to organized school for years and years and years and years, so she didn't know how to do things that people learn when they go to school. But then she kind of had to learn them for herself in adulthood, and it was really interesting seeing kind of that perspective. Overall, it was a very unique reading experience. Tara Westover is a fantastic writer, and I have been wanting to read this book for a while. It's been on my TBR for forever, so I'm really glad I picked it up this year. It's one of my favorite memoirs I've read. Coming in at number 8, we have The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This is a book that takes place both in Chicago and in Paris, and kind of has to do with the AIDS epidemic. One of the reasons why I loved this book so much is because it followed one of my favorite fictional characters I've ever read about, and that is Yale. He just has such an interesting life. He's like an art dealer, but he's also navigating many of his friends and people in his social circle being diagnosed with AIDS and becoming super sick. And you just sympathize with him so much throughout the book. And I think that's why it's so memorable to me. But on top of that, I think it has a great way of kind of interweaving both the political and kind of more societal aspects of the time, but also these really personal stories, which makes it feel very close. And I really appreciated that. And I can't really think of many books that have walked the line as well as The Great Believers did. Coming in at number 7, we have Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This is a graphic memoir, and really is where my love of graphic memoirs kind of starts and was born this year. It is about a young girl, of course Marjane, because she wrote the book and it's a memoir, about her growing up in Iran during the revolution and the overthrow of the Shah. I didn't actually know that much about this time period, so it was super interesting from that perspective, but also while, you know, she went through so many things that I could never like imagine or I've never been through, she also had so many stories that were just so relatable, like coming of age stories that everyone has, you know, the rebellion, the first love, and all of those things. And so you follow her through childhood, and then when she's a teenager, and then also into like young adulthood, and kind of that whole journey for her. And it was just fantastic. I really enjoyed reading it. The artwork was stunning, and I think the story in itself seemed simple, but the more you kind of went into it, the more complex and the more kind of layers you saw. As always, I'm on the lookout for more graphic memoirs. If you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments down below. Coming in at number 6, we have Beartown by Fredrick Backman. So this is a book that when I vlogged my experience reading it, and I will link that on the screen if you guys are kind of interested in my thoughts as I was going through it for the first time. It was a book that was very difficult to read for me. It was very emotionally charged. It had so many different perspectives. Basically, it's about this town that's in Sweden, I want to say, and basically the town is obsessed with hockey, and it follows all these different town members, and you kind of see all of these different perspectives of how much this sports means to this community. So for instance, you have like the new, you know, the rising star young kid that there's so much pressure on him to perform, and you have the like older people in the community that have been following the sport for forever, and so, you know, are kind of like hard-nosed and like want their team to be successful. And then you have the people that don't care and kind of look at hockey from the outside, and you have like the bar owner, and you have the parents to the kids that are on the team, and you have the school teacher, and just all these interesting perspectives. And what I thought was unique about this is that each paragraph, it seemed, would switch between different people often. So you were just flip-flopping between all these people, and it was very difficult to digest. But ultimately, when you came to the end of the story, you got this really interesting, like three-dimensional view of this story. And I'm not going to spoil what happens because I think I have mentioned this accidentally in one of my videos before, but I did put like a spoiler on the screen. Basically, there's some big event that happens in the town, and that kind of throws everything on its head. But I just found it to be a very unique experience in that way. I haven't read something that is so complex in that way before. I did try to pick up book 2 because book 3 is actually coming out in 2021, but I struggled to kind of delve into the story and get invested in it. So I think I need to pick it up at another time when I do have like a bit more time on my hands and I'm ready for something that kind of emotionally intense. But I really did enjoy it. I gave it 5 stars. It broke a long 5-star drought for me at the beginning of the year, so I think it has extra significance because of the time that I read it too. Coming in at number 5, we have Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey Mcquiston. This book totally took me by surprise. I expected it to be a light, fluffy, coming of age, fun story, but it ended up being just this like really like great, witty, hilarious book. Basically, this is a male-male romance between the hypothetical like celebrity son of the future United States and the Prince of England, and their super swoon-worthy romance. But on top of that, there's a lot of like really interesting like political points in here. There's a lot of fun, like really memorable scenes, and I just really loved it. And Casey Mcquiston has quickly become one of my favorite contemporary romance authors, so it was just such a breath of fresh air and so fun to read when I picked it up. So I really, really enjoyed it. Coming in at number 4, we have Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I'm not really surprised that this ended up being so high, but I just put off reading it for so long. But when I finally got to it, it did not disappoint. So this, of course, is the infamous like missing person story. This lady goes missing and her husband is kind of framed for the crime, and you're following their present day story, like the disappearance of Amy, but you're also following their story and their romance before this disappearance. So it's just a wild ride from start to finish. So many twists and turns. I do have a vlog of me reading Gone Girl that is spoiler free, so I will link it down below if you guys want to check it out. But it was one of the most shocking and memorable reading experiences that I had in 2020, so it had to be in my top 5. Coming in at number 3, we have The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This was probably my favorite mystery thriller that I read this year, and as I've said many times when I'm talking about this book, I read it all in one sitting. I stayed up till like 3 in the morning to finish it, and it was just so addictive and full of so many twists and turns, and I just absolutely loved it. It's about this woman who is hired as a nanny in this kind of country house. This house is a smart house, and so everything is like voice controlled, and it's very much like a haunted house play on that, but oh my goodness, this just completely blew me away. And so we've reached my top 2 favorite books of the year. I'm really curious, if you've been following me and you know me, I wonder what you think my top 2 favorite books of the year are. Leave it in the comments down below, or you can message me. I'm just curious. I wonder if my enthusiasm for books comes across. But something super interesting this year is my 2 favorite books were like 2 of the last books that I read during the year. I don't know if this is gonna be a trend, but in previous years that has not been the case. But coming in at number 2, we have Hamnet by Maggie Farrell. This is the only book that I actually have next to me, so it's the only book that I'm holding up, but I do own most of the other books as well. This is a story that is sold as being a book about Hamnet, who is Shakespeare's youngest son, who passed away and is supposedly the inspiration for the play Hamlet. But I would say that this is so much more than that, and also not really that at all. I thought that this was going to be a much more to do with like Shakespeare and his fame and him as a person, but it's really an exploration of grief, and it follows very strongly Shakespeare's wife Agnes. A lot in the author's note, she kind of, Maggie Farrell says that she took a lot of liberties, and a lot of these things aren't known, but she made the story out of kind of what she did know. It is known that Hamnet died when he was young, and it is thought that his name inspired the play, but it isn't super clear like what exactly happened to him. But anyways, this book just explores grief in a way that I haven't read before. Like the way that Maggie Farrell writes so poetically and so lyrically and so devastatingly about grief is just like hit me at my core. And this book was extremely character driven. It did really follow this family, and you got so attached to Agnes as a person, and their kids and everything. But it also had this great, really interesting plot running through it, and it never had a dull moment. Like I was just gripped from start to finish. And I think that balance is really difficult to attain sometimes. And this just did it so well. This will break your soul. This will break your heart, and I'm still not over it, and I'm never going to be over it. The last about 100 pages of this are just so devastating, but this was unforgettable. Like, I have rarely read a book that is written in such a beautiful way. So I absolutely love this. And finally, my favorite book of 2020, of course, is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I knew as soon as I'd like finished the first chapter of this book that it was going to be my favorite book. There was just nothing that was ever going to come close to it. This is a memoir about Chanel Miller. I think previously in my video, I called her Jane Doe, which is like a colloquial term, I guess, for like an unknown female in a case. She actually went by Emily Doe, so sorry. I didn't intentionally like mean to mess that up, but I just forgot that that's what she had gone by in the news. But anyways, she was a student. She was living in California, and she went to a Stanford fraternity party where she was sexually assaulted. And this story got a lot of news coverage. She was anonymous for a long time. People didn't view her in necessarily the best light because the person who assaulted her was like this famous athlete, and everyone, you know, had reasons why they didn't believe her or things that they wanted to say about her story. And it really took a toll. As you're reading it, your heart just breaks because the victim shaming and the things that we expect of people are just so ridiculous sometimes. And I think in that time, she really describes how she felt so lonely and so anonymous. And so this book is her kind of like, this is who I am. And it was such a powerful statement. But on top of that, Chanel Miller can write, and she writes better than probably anyone I've ever read before. She has a way of describing a story, a situation, something that happened to her when she was growing up, and then using it to tell you how she felt about something in a way that I have never experienced before. She just writes in this kind of simple way that is so effective and so descriptive. You feel like you get to know her through this story. You get to like see her as she was growing up and the person that she was before this and how this event changed her and how the media influenced things and who she is now and all of this like really powerful information. But at the heart of it, she is an incredible writer. And I think that's one of the reasons why this was so impactful for me. And it just left me speechless. I've rarely been affected so much by a book, and I just felt like this one was just perfection. I would change absolutely nothing about it. Of course, huge trigger warning for sexual assault, rape, because that is the main content of the book. And there are some more graphic parts relating to her trial. So I would say if that is triggering to you, I would stay away from this book. Alrighty, that is it for this video. This was enormously long, and I'm sorry, but there were just so many books that I wanted to showcase this year, and I didn't want to cut any of them short, so I did. So anyways, I hope you really enjoyed this. I would love to know if any of these books were in your top books of the year, or if there are any of them that you are interested to check out after hearing me kind of chat about them. And I'm going to leave it here. I hope you really enjoyed this, and I will see you again with another video very soon.